Doctor Who's 60th anniversary specials made history by not just bringing back an old Doctor, but making them the new incumbent. And if you're going to pull off a stunt like that, you might as well do it with David Tennant, the Doctor many regard as revived Who's Tom Baker. As a result, Tennant now has 2 Doctors to his name, and you can't talk about the Tennant era without clarifying which one you're referring to. On screen, the 14th Doctor's era only lasted 3 episodes, making it one of the easier ones to binge. However, if you think those episodes tell you everything you need to know about him, think again. So grab some tuna madras and cast your mind back to November 2023 for a deep dive on the 60th anniversary Doctor. Number 10. Tennant had major input on his new costume. The whole idea of the 14th Doctor was that he was similar but subtly different to the 10th. This was reflected in his costume, which incorporated a blue rather than brown coat, plaid rather than striped suit, and a square end rather than pointy end tie. And being the massive Doctor Who fan that he is, Tennant had lots of input on the design. As costume designer Pam Down has since revealed, he chose the 14th Doctor's coat fabric himself. And in terms of more obscure touches, he insisted on wearing the waistcoat with the top button done up, but none of the others. No one was quite sure why, not least Russell T Davies, who recalled that, quote, "In moments like that, you trust your lead actor. It's like the way that doctors often wear big flowing coats, but rarely do them up, even when it's clearly a bit nippy, because it just looks cooler." It's also worth noting that he did something similar as the 10th Doctor, fastening different jacket buttons for each story. And if you don't believe us, you can go back and check. I promise it's true. Whatever the case, knowing that so much thought went into the creation of 14's costume makes it all the more special. Number 9. We almost got a returning Doctor decades prior. Bringing back Tennant as a new incarnation was a controversial move, but it wasn't the first time a returning Doctor had been mooted. Back in the 1980s, Doctor Who founding father Sidney Newman actually suggested bringing back Patrick Troughton to replace Colin Baker. And to be fair, there was some logic to the idea. At the time, Troughton was the oldest surviving Doctor actor, following William Hartnell's death in 1975. He'd also returned to the show already on 3 separate occasions, appearing in The Three Doctors, The Five Doctors and The Two Doctors. In true 60th style, Troughton's return would only have been temporary, with Newman making an equally radical for the time proposal for the next Doctor, that they should be female. Of course, it would be many years before either suggestion was taken seriously. However, the 14th Doctor foreshadowing continued in Doctor Who's 1990s wilderness years, when thanks to a series of returns and public appearances, Jon Pertwee essentially became the face of the show again. And lest we forget, even before the 60th, Tennant had reappeared in various expanded media projects such as headlining Time Lord Victorious, meeting past Doctors in Big Finish's Out of Time series, and constantly gatecrashing 13th Doctor video games and comics. All of which is to say that, in hindsight, we really should have seen this one coming. Number 8. He encountered a very bizarre Dalek type. On screen, the 14th Doctor never got to fight the Daleks, save for a brief encounter with a prototype Dalek in the Children in Need minisode Destination Skaro, which might not even be canon anyway. Doctor Who magazine made up for this in their comic strip with Liberation of the Daleks, a 14-part epic told in the year between The Power of the Doctor and the Star Beast. Picking up directly after the 13th Doctor's regeneration, the story sees the Doctor land in the Dalek Dome, a twisted amusement park where Dalek invasions are restaged as simulations. As part of this, the Doctor encounters various Dalek facsimiles, all inspired by designs seen on screen. However, the dome also features some new models, namely Dalek info points who offer assistance to tourists, and a Dalek priest who officiates weddings in the Dalek wedding zone. Yep, seriously, it's right here, see? Look, right here. It's a characteristically wacky moment for a strip which begins with the Daleks invading the 1966 World Cup and ends with a replica Jules Rimet trophy melting on the TARDIS console. What's more, the final frame sees the Doctor remark that he, quote, wouldn't want to go back to Skaro in a hurry, implying that 14's Dalek encounters take place directly next to each other. Number 7. The 60th anniversary specials were originally a lot different. When it was announced that David Tennant would be returning to Doctor Who, fans naturally assumed he'd be playing the 10th Doctor. That is until he was spotted on set alongside the 13th Doctor's TARDIS in a striking new costume, prompting rumours that he would actually be playing a new incarnation. However, it's since been revealed that the 60th was originally going to take the form of a flashback special, taking place during the events of Series 4, with Tennant clarifying that, quote, "It would have been an unseen adventure from years before. Russell immediately had an idea for a story, which I'm not going to mention because I don't think it's yet seen the light of day. It certainly wouldn't have been part of an ongoing story, but I hope one day he does use it because it sounded great." As great as the 60th ultimately was, it's tempting to speculate about what might have been and where this story might have fitted in. Maybe between the Doctor's daughter and the Unicorn and the Wasp, or maybe after the Library two-parter, who knows? Hopefully it will reach screens eventually, either with the 10th Doctor and Donna or another TARDIS team. Or how about its own spin-off show? Failing that, Big Finish will probably adapt it, let's be honest. Number 6. His first line was improvised. Many fans correctly guessed that the power of the Doctor would end with Jodie Whittaker regenerating into David Tennant rather than Ncuti Gatwa. Some even predicted that it would end with Tennant exclaiming, "What? What? What?" Just as he'd done at the end of Doomsday and Last of the Time Lords. It wasn't exactly the longest day at the keyboard, Russell T Davies later joked. One aspect of the regeneration that was a surprise was 14's first line, "I know these teeth," a reference to the end of The Parting of the Ways when the newly regenerated 10th Doctor remarks that his new teeth feel weird. The line even came as a surprise to Russell T Davies because he didn't actually write it. Instead, it was added by Tennant himself as a tribute to his first ever Doctor Who scene. Presumably, he drew the line name-dropping Barcelona too. As such, for the first time in the show's history, an incoming Doctor helped pen their first scene, which, given the fact that Tennant has played the Doctor before and that he's such a big Doctor Who fan, feels very apt. Number 5. He had cameos everywhere. Doctor Who magazine was far from the only place where fans could get their 14 fix while they waited for the 60th anniversary specials. On TV, there was the skit that opened Comic Relief's 2023 telethon, which saw a queasy Lenny Henry retreat to his dressing room, only to regenerate into the 14th Doctor. Again, the canonicity of this is up for debate, though it becomes even funnier when you remember that Lenny Henry had actually played the Doctor before in a 1985 sketch. Also, fun fact, one of my best friends from childhood wrote that Comic Relief sketch in 2023, and I was so proud of him. Then, in the days leading up to the Star Beast, 14 cropped up in the aforementioned Destination Skaro, and even read the CBeebies bedtime story, something which Doctor actors including Tennant had done before, but never in character. Elsewhere, 2023 saw 14 make his video game debut as part of a Doctor Who Fall Guys crossover event. Following this, he was also made available as a character in the Doctor Who mobile game Lost in Time. And last but not least, there were the linked short stories Under Control, Into Control, first published in the 2024 Doctor Who Annual, which saw 14 go up against the Sycorax, including their queen, who naively assumes he's just 10. All of this before he finally touched down in Camden Market in November 2023. To be honest, it's a wonder he was still standing by then. Number 4. The reason he regenerated into his own clothes. The second most notable thing about the 13th Doctor's regeneration was that her clothes regenerated with her. This had only ever happened once before, when the first Doctor regenerated into the second, with every subsequent Doctor inheriting their predecessor's costume, and in many cases not changing out of it until the end of their debut story. As such, fans were convinced that it would be part of a bigger plot, and we speculated about this a lot ourselves, potentially involving the Toymaker, given that he faced the first Doctor shortly before his regeneration and would shortly be facing the 14th. However, in the end, the explanation was much less complicated, with Russell T Davies simply wanting to avoid disrespecting drag culture. He said, quote, "With respect to Jodie and her Doctor, I think it can look like mockery when a straight man wears her clothes. To put a great big 6-foot Scotsman into them looks like we're taking the mickey." Now, your mileage on this may vary, but the decision was clearly well-intentioned, if a little odd, considering that Sacha Dhawan had worn the 13th Doctor's costume literally in that same episode. However, it's understandable that you'd also want the first image of 14 to be him in his own outfit, given that he was only going to be wearing it for a year. Number 3. COVID-19 was responsible for Tennant's return. The COVID-19 pandemic was an awful time, but it did have one very unexpected benefit for Doctor Who fans. The road to the 14th Doctor began 2 years before he arrived on screen. It all started with the Doctor Who lockdown tweet-alongs, which brought fans and creatives together to watch old episodes during those pandemic days when we were all stuck indoors. Russell T Davies, David Tennant and Catherine Tate first got involved for a tweet-along of The Stolen Earth and Journey's End in April 2020. But it was the tweet-along for The Runaway Bride later in the year that changed everything, with the trio continuing the conversation afterwards via text. As part of this exchange, Tate commented that she'd love to do it all again, with Tennant responding that he'd come back to Doctor Who in a heartbeat. Believing it to be his duty, Russell T Davies took the proposal of a Tennant-Tate return to the BBC, and the rest is history, with the BBC then coercing him to come back as showrunner, and thus RTD2 was born. It's one of the few good things to come out of COVID, and a wonderful example of Doctor Who's past shaping its future. Essentially, people watching old Tennant and Tate stories together actually brought them back. We manifested this. Now, if only we could do the same for Eccleston, Smith and Capaldi. Though please, let's not have another pandemic, shall we? Number 2. He had a pig companion. Yep, seriously. On screen, the 14th Doctor never got a companion of his own, spending his entire tenure in the company of an old friend. But as we've established, the 14th Doctor's adventures extend far beyond what was seen on TV. And though many of his expanded media exploits saw him travelling solo, he did acquire an original companion in the Under Control, Into Control expanded media stories. With this being Doctor Who, said companion was a pig. Not a space pig or a talking pig, just an ordinary Earth pig that the Doctor rescues from the Sycorax and christens Alfredo. He might not be capable of speech, but Alfredo is skilled in other areas, saving the Doctor's skin by tripping up the Sycorax Queen at just the right moment. He's nowhere to be seen in the interim, wandering off at the first available opportunity, but hey, you can't have everything, can you? Regardless, he ends up going off with the Doctor at the story's end. It's not known if they had any more adventures, but given how many stories took place between the power of the Doctor and the Star Beast, it's entirely possible. Alternatively, perhaps he's still knocking around the TARDIS somewhere, chameleon style. TARDIS Pigpen, anyone? Look, if we see the Doctor eating a bacon sandwich one day, then maybe we should be a little bit concerned. Number 1. Tennant is open to another return, but Russell T Davies has bad news about his fate. Ever since the 14th Doctor's era came to an end, fans have been wondering whether we might see him again. Not least because he's still alive and well, enjoying domestic bliss with the nobles in Chiswick. Initially, the focus was, quite rightly, on Ncuti Gatwa establishing himself as the Doctor. As such, the notion of another comeback was immediately shot down, with Tennant claiming that, quote, the door is not any more open than it ever was, and Russell T Davies insisting that, quote, he's absolutely not coming back. But now, the landscape is slightly different. Billie Piper has returned to the show, seemingly as the 16th Doctor, with Tennant rumoured to be joining her. And controversial though it would be, it would kind of make sense. Indeed, a cynic would say that the whole idea of parking the 14th Doctor on Earth was to have a fallback, should the 15th Doctor's era not work out as planned, which is clearly what's happened. These days, Tennant seems more open to a return, and resigned to the fact that it will probably happen at some point. There's just one problem, however. According to Russell T Davies, the 14th Doctor has already met his end during a trip to 2060's Venice. But time can be rewritten, right? Russell T Davies' comments on this matter are clearly quite jokey as well, so don't be surprised to see him wheel out Tennant again at some point in the future. And that concludes our list. Well, we've spoken about David Tennant's most recent incarnation, but what about his first? You can check out 10 things you didn't know about the 10th Doctor on the channel now. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.